again, it's not my field. I'm not a scientist. I'm not really a 19th century historian. I know a little bit about this. There's a brand new book just come out on Darwin by an English theologian and social historian called Nick Spencer. I can't remember what the title is. The book's just come out just recently. One of my sons knows Nick a bit. But anyway, it looks good. I just saw a review of it the other day. Because people say, oh, well, Darwin himself, of course, was a Christian. And insofar as Darwin lost his faith, it wasn't because of his scientific researches, it was because of tragedy in his own personal life, which he couldn't account for. Darwin was as much a symptom as a cause of the deism or Epicureanism, which then came to be associated with him. The thing is, if you're an Epicurean, then there may be gods or a god somewhere, but actually they're a long way away. And the key thing is that this world has its own processes which are rumbling along. And so evolution is basically an Epicurean idea. Read Lucretius, De Rerum Naturae, and other writers of that type. Once God gets pushed out of the process, then of course what happens must happen from within rather than from outside. And then you can caricature the idea of divine intervention. Because if you're a deist or an Epicurean, you've got this distant God who, if he's going to do anything in the world, would have to reach down and rather incongruously mess around and then go away again. And that was never the biblical worldview. Insofar as it was a view that many Christians in Europe and America in the 18th and 19th century held, it was a view which came to them from the prevailing deism imposed onto Scripture rather than read out of Scripture. And here's one of the key points, is that already in the late 18th century, Darwin's grandfather Erasmus, whose house is in Lichfield, which is where I used to be dean, so it's how I know about him, he was articulating a view of evolution. And not just about species evolving, but about all sorts of other things as well. What we call social Darwinism was believed in by many people before Charles Darwin ever got on a boat and went anywhere. Charles Darwin himself was in that matrix where it goes back to Malthus and people like that. The idea that society is evolving and that it's evolving by a sort of process of struggle. But this is basically Epicurean, and it goes exactly with the political philosophy of the Enlightenment, which says get rid of God out of the equation, and then vox populi vox Dei will sort it out. So the democratic process is the political analogue of what Darwin was doing. This is why Darwin gets all the mileage that he does, because it's where people wanted to go. God can't tell us how to run the world. We'll run it our own way, and then religion will be an escape from the world to go off. So all of that stuff is going on, and you have to position Darwin in there. The irony is that none of this means that Darwin's scientific observations were wrong, or that his conclusions from those observations were wrong necessarily. What it means is the reason why people wanted to believe that stuff was not because they said, oh my goodness, he's discovered some very interesting finches. This means we can't believe in Genesis anymore. It was, because there was an entire worldview which was already up and running, which was deeply inimical to the whole biblical worldview, not just of special creation, but of the heaven-earth interlocking and overlappingness. And that's what we've been up against. And so I'm perfectly happy to say that species have evolved. I'm perfectly happy to say that that's how God was at work, and maybe is at work. And that the way God's presence in and activity within the world is not that of a deist God intervening from the outside. The Psalms say that God feeds the ravens when they call to him. What's going on there? We call it instinct because we're Epicureans in our language. We want to say it's all just going on. But God is present and more mysterious. But then that simply puts you back in the early 18th century, only now knowing that you're going to have to face the 1755 question. What about evil within creation? How do we deal with that?